"Why'd you pay? Just to do it?" she asked. What the Mafia boss did left her begging for more. The rain in Chicago did not wash things clean. It only made the grime slicker. It coated the cracked pavement outside of Jerry's diner in a sheen of oil and neon reflections, turning the world into a blurred watercolor of gray and electric blue. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, burnt bacon, and the damp wool of customers trying to escape the downpour. Natalie wiped the counter for the 100th time that evening, her wrist aching with a dull, repetitive throb. She was 24 years old, but tonight she felt 50. Her reflection in the stainless steel napkin dispenser showed tired eyes framed by stray strands of brown hair that had escaped her messy bun hours ago. She checked the clock on the wall. It was 10 past 11 at night. Her shift had technically ended 10 minutes ago, but Jerry was short-staffed, and Natalie needed every single dime she could scrape together. A cough from the corner booth drew her attention. It was the man in the charcoal suit. He had been sitting there for 2 hours, nursing a single black coffee that had gone cold long ago. He did not look like the usual clientele. The usuals were truck drivers, third-shift factory workers, or college students looking for cheap fries. This man was sharp angles and expensive fabric, out of place among the vinyl seats and ketchup stains. Natalie walked over with the pot, the glass heavy in her hand. "Can I top that off for you?" she asked, her voice rasping slightly from fatigue. The man looked up. He had a face that gave away nothing, smooth and indifferent. "No," he said. His voice was low, barely carrying over the hum of the refrigerator. "I am done." He slid a crisp $20 bill onto the table, covering the cost of a $3 coffee several times over. Then, he placed a small, matte black business card next to it. "Keep the change," he said, standing up. He adjusted his cufflinks, a flash of silver catching the overhead light. "If you ever get tired of smelling like grease for minimum wage, call the number. Easy upscale work. One night, no complications." Natalie frowned. Looking at the card, it had no company name, no logo, just a 10-digit phone number printed in white embossing. "What kind of work?" she asked, suspicion narrowing her eyes. She knew what men usually meant when they offered easy money to waitresses in this part of town. "Dinner," the man said simply. "Just dinner. A client needs company. Someone to sit across from him, nothing more." He turned and walked out into the rain before she could ask another question, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully in his wake. Natalie stared at the card. $5,000. The man had not said the figure, but she remembered hearing rumors about these kinds of private bookings from a girl who used to work the morning shift, high rollers who wanted an atmosphere without the attachment. It sounded dangerous. It sounded like a lie. She shoved the card into her apron pocket and went back to the counter. She could not afford to dream about easy money. When she finally clocked out and took the bus back to her apartment on the south side, reality was waiting for her in the form of a red envelope taped to her door. Eviction notice. Her stomach dropped, a cold stone settling in her gut. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking as she unlocked the door and stepped into the small, chilly apartment. It smelled of lavender cleaning spray, a scent she used to mask the underlying odor of mildew. "Chloe?" she called out softly. Her younger sister was asleep on the couch, wrapped in 3 blankets. The television was on, playing a rerun of a sitcom with the volume turned down low. Chloe looked pale, her skin almost translucent in the blue light of the screen. The treatments were working, the doctors said, but they were draining the life out of her faster than the illness itself. Natalie walked into the kitchen and sat at the tiny table, staring at the stack of bills she had ignored for 2 weeks. The hospital, the pharmacy, the specialists, and now the landlord. She had 3 days to come up with $2,000, or they would be on the street. She pulled the black card from her pocket. The edges were sharp against her fingertips. Just dinner. It was a trap. It had to be. But looking at her sister shivering under those blankets, Natalie realized she did not have the luxury of safety. She took her phone out and dialed the number. It rang once. "Hello," a deep voice answered. Not the man from the diner. This voice was different, older, heavier. I, I'm calling about the job, Natalie said, hating how weak her voice sounded. The man at the diner gave me this card. There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing. Name Natalie. Be at the Vane Tower, Penthouse B, tomorrow at 8 in the evening. Dress modestly. Do not be late. The line went dead. The Vane Tower was a spire of glass and steel that pierced the Chicago skyline, a monument to wealth that Natalie had only ever seen from the window of the elevated train. Standing in the lobby the next evening, she felt painfully small. The floors were marble, polished to a mirror shine. The air smelled of expensive cologne and silence. She was wearing the best dress she owned, a navy blue knee-length piece she had bought for a cousin's wedding 3 years ago. It was modest, high-necked, and entirely unexciting. She clutched her purse against her side, trying to stop her hands from trembling. The concierge directed her to the private elevator without asking for her ID, as if he had been expecting her. The ride up was smooth and fast, your ears popping as the numbers on the digital display climbed higher and higher until they hit the top floor. The door slid open directly into the penthouse. Natalie stepped out, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. The space was cavernous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city lights below. It was beautiful, but it felt cold. There were no personal photos, no clutter, no signs of life, just sleek, modern furniture in shades of gray and black. You are on time. The voice came from the shadows near the window. Natalie jumped, spinning around. A man stepped into the light. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of a black dress shirt. He wore no tie, and the top button was undone, revealing a hint of tanned skin. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were so dark they looked black. He was terrifying. He was beautiful. "I'm Natalie," she managed to say, her throat dry. "I know," he said. He did not offer his name. He simply gestured to a long dining table set for two near the window. "Please, sit." Natalie walked over, her legs feeling like lead. She sat in the chair he indicated. The table was set with fine china and crystal glasses. There was a bottle of red wine already open, breathing on the table. The man sat opposite her. He did not smile. He did not leer. He just watched her, his gaze intense and unreadable. He reached out and poured wine into her glass, his movements fluid and controlled. "Drink," he said softly. "It will help with the nerves." Natalie took a sip. It was rich and velvety, unlike anything she had ever tasted. "Who are you?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "You can call me Leon," he replied. "Leon Moretti." The name floated in the back of her mind, something she had heard on the news or whispered in fearful tones at the diner, but she could not place it. A server appeared from a side door, silent as a ghost, placing plates of food in front of them. Filet mignon, roasted asparagus, truffle mashed potatoes. The smell was intoxicating. Natalie realized she had not eaten since a granola bar at 6 that morning. "Eat," Leon commanded gently. She hesitated, then picked up her fork. She took a bite, and the flavor exploded in her mouth. She couldn't help the small noise of appreciation that escaped her throat. Leon did not eat. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass, his eyes fixed on her face. He watched her chew, watched her swallow, watched the way her hand tightened around the fork. It wasn't a sexual gaze. Exactly. It was something more primal, like a predator watching prey, or perhaps a scientist observing a rare specimen. "Tell me about your day," he said. Natalie blinked, swallowing a piece of steak. "My day?" "Yes. The truth, not the polite version." Natalie looked at him, bewildered. Why would a man in a penthouse want to hear about a waitress's double shift? But the demand in his eyes was clear. I woke up at 5, she began, feeling foolish. The bus was late. I spilled coffee on my uniform in the first hour. My feet hurt. I'm worried about my sister. "Stop," Leon said. Natalie froze. "Tell me about your sister." He said, "She's sick." Natalie whispered, looking down at her plate. "She has leukemia. We're trying a new treatment, but it's expensive, and the side effects are hard on her." Leon listened. He did not interrupt with platitudes or pity. He just listened, his expression unmoving, absorbing every word she said. He asked simple questions. What is her name? How old is she? What does she like to read? For 40 minutes. Natalie spoke. She talked about the fear of losing Chloe, the exhaustion of working 2 jobs, the weight of the world that felt like it was crushing her chest. She ate the entire steak while she spoke, fueled by a hunger she hadn't realized was so deep. Leon never touched his food. He just drank his wine and watched her. When the plates were cleared, the silence returned. Natalie felt a sudden wave of shame. She had just poured her heart out to a stranger for money. Is that it?" she asked. Leon stood up. Yes. He walked over to a side table and picked up a thick white envelope. He also lifted a heavy paper bag with the logo of a high-end Italian market. He walked around the table and stopped beside her chair. Natalie tensed, expecting him to touch her shoulder, to lean in, to ask for the real payment, but he didn't. He placed the envelope and the bag on the table in front of her. $5,000, he said, "and some things for your pantry. Take them." Natalie stared at the items, then up at him. "I don't understand. You didn't want anything?" Leon looked down at her. His eyes were pools of darkness, hiding secrets she could not begin to fathom. "I got what I wanted," he said. "Go home to your sister." Natalie. He turned his back on her and walked toward the window, staring out at the city rain. Natalie stood up, clutching the envelope in the bag. She hesitated, wanting to ask more, but the set of his shoulders told her the night was over. She walked to the elevator, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The ride back to the south side was a blur. Natalie sat on the bus, gripping the grocery bag tightly. Inside, she found imported pasta, jars of sauce, expensive cheese, and boxes of chocolates. The envelope in her purse felt like it was burning a hole through the leather. She counted the money 3 times, $5,000 in $100 bills. It was real. When she reached her apartment building, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets damp and glistening. She walked up the stairs to the 3rd floor, her keys ready in her hand, but as she turned the corner to her hallway, she stopped. Her landlord, Mr. Henderson, was standing in front of her door. He was a short, balding man who usually wore a scowl permanently etched into his face. Beside him stood 2 men in suits, not the expensive kind Leon wore, but the cheap, ill-fitting kind that screamed bureaucratic muscle. Natalie's heart stopped. They were here to throw her out. She was too late. "Mr. Henderson," she called out, rushing forward. "Please wait, I have the money, I have it right here." She fumbled with her purse, trying to get the envelope out. "Mr. Henderson looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion. "Natalie? What are you talking about? The rent!" Natalie gasped, breathless. "The eviction notice? I have $2,000. Please don't kick us out, Mr. Henderson frowned, exchanging a glance with the men beside him. "Natalie, the rent is paid." Natalie froze. "What? It was paid an hour ago," Henderson said, scratching his head. "A wire transfer covered the back rent and the next 6 months in advance." "6 months?" Natalie whispered. "Yeah. Came from some holding company. Aegis Corp or something. I was just here to take the notice off the door and check the furnace like you asked last week." Natalie stared at him, her mind spinning. An hour ago. She'd been sitting in the penthouse an hour ago, eating steak and talking about Chloe. She looked at the red notice in Mr. Henderson's hand, then at the closed door of her apartment where her sister lay sleeping. Who authorized the payment?" she asked. Henderson shrugged. "Don't say. Just a routing number. But the money cleared. You're good." "Natalie." He peeled the red tape off the door and crumpled the notice. "Have a good night." He walked past her, the 2 men trailing behind him. Natalie stood alone in the hallway, the silence buzzing in her ears. She unlocked the door and slipped inside. The apartment was quiet. She placed the grocery bag on the kitchen counter and sat down. Pulling the envelope of cash out again, He had paid her $5,000 for dinner, and he had paid her rent for 6 months. Why? It wasn't kindness. Men like that weren't kind. It felt like ownership. It felt like he was staking a claim. She should be terrified. She should run. She should take Chloe and leave the city. But as she remembered the way he had looked at her, the intensity of his focus, the way the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them in that glass tower, she didn't feel fear. She felt a magnetic pull, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She pulled the black card from her pocket again. Her thumb traced the raised white numbers. Her curiosity was a physical weight in her chest. She needed to know why. She needed to know who Leon Moretti really was. She picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. It was past midnight. He wouldn't answer. But she dialed anyway. It rang 3 times. "You have questions?" Leon's voice said. He didn't say hello. He just knew. "Why?" Natalie asked into the dark kitchen. "Why did you pay the rent?" Silence stretched on the line, heavy and intimate, because you were worrying about it while you were eating. Leon said, "It ruined the meal." "That's it? That's the reason? Come back on Thursday." Leon said, "Same time." The line went dead. Natalie lowered the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. She walked into the living room and checked on Chloe, tucking the blanket tighter around her sister's shoulders. That night, when Natalie finally fell into a restless sleep, she did not dream of the diner or the bills. She dreamed of him. She dreamed she was in the penthouse again. But this time, there was no table between them. Leon was standing over her, his dark eyes scanning her face, his hand reaching out not to take but to shield. In the dream, the city outside was burning, flames licking up the sides of the glass tower, but inside, in the circle of his shadow, she was safe. She woke up with a start. The morning light filtering through the blinds, her skin tingling with a phantom touch that had never actually happened. She knew, with a sinking certainty, that she would go back on Thursday. She had to. Thursday felt different. The 2 days since she had last seen him had passed in a strange haze. The rent was paid. The pantry was full. For the first time in over a year, Natalie could breathe without the sharp pain of financial panic constricting her lungs. But the air she was breathing felt thin, charged with an electricity that centered on one man. She told Chloe she was taking an extra shift, a private catering gig. The lie tasted like ash, but the truth was impossible. How could she explain Leon Moretti? She did not even understand him herself. This time, as she got ready, her hands did not shake with fear. They trembled with something else. A humming anticipation that settled low in her stomach. She looked at the modest navy dress she had worn before, still hanging on the back of her bedroom door. It felt wrong. It felt like a costume for a victim. She was not a victim. He had treated her with more respect than any customer at the diner, with more care than any man she had ever dated. He had listened to her. He had solved her biggest problem without her even having to ask. She opened her closet and pulled out a dress she had bought on clearance 2 years ago for a date with a man who had turned out to be a disappointment. It was a deep burgundy, the color of the wine he had served her. It was silk, or at least a good imitation, and it clung to her curves in a way the navy dress had deliberately hidden. The neckline was a soft V, tasteful but undeniably feminine. She put it on, staring at her reflection. She saw the dark circles under her eyes, but she also saw a spark. She was not just a tired waitress. She was a woman walking into a lion's den, and this time, she wanted the lion to see her. She let her hair down, brushing it until it fell in soft waves over her shoulders. When she stepped out of the elevator into the penthouse, he was already there, standing by the window. He turned, and his dark eyes swept over her. It was not a long look, just a single, assessing glance, but she felt it in every pore. He noted the dress, the hair, the shift in her posture. His expression did not change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. Just once. "Good evening, Natalie," he said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated through the quiet room. "Leon," she replied, surprised at how steady her own voice sounded. He gestured to the table. It was set just as before. But tonight, there was no server. The food was already laid out on silver platters. Covered. I figured, he said. We could do without the interruptions. He pulled out her chair for her. As she sat, his fingers brushed the bare skin of her shoulder. It was the briefest of touches, lighter than a breath, but a jolt went through her, sharp and hot. She inhaled quickly. He walked to his side of the table and sat, his movements economical and precise. He raised the silver domes, revealing perfectly cooked salmon and a salad of dark greens and bright red pomegranate seeds. He poured the wine himself. This time, he ate. They sat in silence for several minutes. The only sound was the soft clink of silverware against china. The silence was not awkward, it was charged. It felt like the air before a storm, heavy and waiting. "Why did you really pay my rent?" Natalie asked, setting her fork down. "The meal you ruined was not a $2,000 meal." Leon looked at her, chewing his food slowly. He swallowed. "You misunderstand me," he said. "I do not care about the money. I care about the distraction. You were not present, and you paid to have me." "Present?" "I paid," he said, his gaze unwavering, "for your undivided attention." Natalie felt a flush creep up her neck. He had paid for her focus, not her body, not her time, but her mind. It was the strangest, most intoxicating form of currency. "So, am I a good investment?" she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. He did not smile. He never smiled. He simply watched her. "You are here," he stated. They ate again. He asked her about Chloe, about the treatments. She told him about the new drug trial, her hopes and her fears. He listened, his focus absolute. It felt like being held in a spotlight. "And you?" she asked, emboldened by the wine and the strange intimacy of the room. "What about you? You know everything about my small life. I know nothing about yours, except that you live in a glass tower and buy people's attention." Leon sipped his wine. He looked out the window at the endless city lights. "There is not much to know," he said. "My life is about structure, about debts and payments. Most of it is noise. Then why am I here? Because," he said, turning his gaze back to her, "you are quiet." He picked up a small glass of amber liquid, whiskey, she assumed, that sat beside his plate. He slid it across the table toward her. It stopped just shy of her hand. "When you live in a world of constant noise," he said, "silence becomes a commodity. Trust becomes a luxury. Some things cannot be bought. Natalie, they can only be protected." His words hung in the air between them. Protected. It sounded like a promise. It also sounded like a warning. She reached for the glass, and as she did, he moved his own hand, passing her a small dish of olives. Their hands brushed. Not just a brush, but a slide of skin against skin. His fingers were warm, the contact sending a shiver straight down her spine and making her toes curl in her shoes. She drew her hand back as if burned. He saw it. His eyes flickered to her hand, then back to her face. He had felt it too. He said nothing. He simply retracted his hand and leaned back, his expression once again impassive. A mask of perfect control, but his chest rose and fell in a breath that was just slightly deeper than before. After dinner, she did not wait for him to dismiss her. She felt the pull of his gravity, but she also felt the need to regain her own power. She stood up. "Thank you for the meal." Leon, he stood as well. He walked with her to the elevator. The white envelope was on the console by the door. He picked it up and held it out to her. She looked at the envelope, then at his face. She did not take it. "Is this all it is?" she asked. "A transaction? You listen, I get paid." "It is whatever you need it to be," he replied, his voice flat. "But you will take the money. Chloe's treatments are not optional." His words were a cold slap of reality. He was right. Her pride had no place here. She took the envelope, the paper crinkling in her tight grip. The elevator doors slid open. She stepped inside, but she did not press the button. She turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, a tall, dark silhouette against the glittering backdrop of the city. She wanted him to move. She wanted him to reach for her, to shatter the unbearable tension that was crackling between them. She took one small step forward, a fractional lean, an invitation that was barely a suggestion. Leon watched her. He did not move a muscle. He just looked at her, his eyes unblinking, as if committing her to memory. He would not cross the line. She would have to be the one to do it, and she was not ready. She pressed the lobby button. "Good night, Leon," she whispered. The doors slid shut, hiding his face from view. Natalie leaned against the wall of the elevator, her heart hammering. She was confused, aroused, and angry all at once. There was no kiss. There was no touch. There was just that searing, unbearable intensity and another thick wad of cash in her purse. The diner felt different when she returned to work the next day. The smell of grease was nauseating. The customers were loud, their demands grating on her nerves. She felt like a creature who had lived in a quiet, dark cave and was suddenly thrust into a loud, bright marketplace. She was refilling salt shakers when Maria, the other evening waitress, nudged her. "Hey, Nat," she whispered, nodding toward a booth in the corner. "Who are your friends?" Natalie looked over. 2 men sat in the booth. They were not like the suit from the other night. These men were beefy, wearing cheap leather jackets and expressions of bored menace. They were drinking water and staring directly at her. "I have no idea," Natalie said, her stomach tightening. Maria frowned. "Well, they came in about 20 minutes ago. Asked me if I knew the brunette waitress with the connections. When I said I didn't know what they were talking about, they sat down and ordered water. They haven't looked away from you since—" Connections. The word hit her like a punch. "Leon," Natalie tried to ignore them, wiping down the counter, her back to them. But she could feel their eyes on her. It was a crawling, violating sensation, completely unlike the focused intensity of Leon's gaze. He made her feel seen. This made her feel targeted. The bell above the door jingled, and Natalie looked up, her heart leaping into her throat. It was Leon. He walked into the diner, and the entire room seemed to dim, all the sound and energy sucking into the vacuum of his presence. He was wearing dark jeans and a black Henley that stretched across his shoulders, a stark contrast to his penthouse attire. He looked less like a businessman and more like a panther that had wandered off the street. He did not look at Natalie. He did not look at the men. He simply slid onto a stool at the far end of the counter, facing the kitchen, his back to the room. "Order?" Natalie asked, walking over to him, her hands trembling so badly she hid them under her apron. "Coffee. Black," he said, his voice a quiet command. She poured it for him. He said nothing. He just sat there, sipping his coffee, a silent, immovable object. Natalie glanced over at the corner booth. The 2 men were no longer looking at her. They were looking at Leon's back. Their faces, once bored and arrogant, were now pale. They were shifting, whispering to each other. Leon set his cup down, the ceramic making a soft click on the counter. Without turning, he spoke, his voice too low for anyone but Natalie to hear. "Finish your shift." A minute later, the 2 men in the booth stood up. They threw a $5 bill on the table and walked quickly, almost jogging, out of the diner. The bell jingled their departure. Leon finished his coffee. He placed a $10 bill on the counter and stood. He walked out, just as silently as he had arrived. Natalie finished her shift an hour later, her mind reeling. She clocked out and pushed through the back door into the alley, needing the cold, damp air to clear her head. The rain was falling again, a steady, miserable drizzle. He was there. He was leaning against the brick wall in the darkness, 20 feet away, partially hidden by the shadow of a large dumpster. The rain silvered the edges of his hair. Natalie stopped, her hand still on the door. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a cocktail of fear and fury. "Who were those men? Why did they leave when you showed up? Why are you watching me?" Leon pushed off the wall and walked toward her. Slow, deliberate steps that splashed in the puddles. He stopped a few feet in front of her. The alley was lit by a single, flickering yellow security light, casting harsh shadows across his face. They were nobody. He said they were flies. Flies who were asking about my connections, she shot back. They meant you. You put a target on my back. Leon's expression hardened. No, I am the reason the target will be removed. He took another step, closing the distance between them. She was trapped between the brick wall and his solid frame. The smell of him, rain, expensive soap, and something uniquely dark and male filled her senses. I am watching you, he said, his voice dropping to that intimate growl. Because someone has to. She looked up at him, her breath catching. The rain was plastering her hair to her face, dripping from her chin. He was so close. She could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cold night air. This is insane, she whispered. You pay my rent. You buy me dinner. You scare off thugs at my job. What do you want from me? His eyes dropped to her mouth. She saw the fight in his face. She saw the iron control warring with a sudden, raw need. He raised his hand, his fingers hesitating in the air between them before he slowly, carefully, brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. His thumb grazed her skin, rough and warm. She shivered, but she did not pull away. His other hand came up, cupping her jaw. He was not forcing her. He was holding her, anchoring her. He tilted her head up. I told you, he murmured, your attention. And then he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of possession, a brand of heat and pressure in the cold rain. His lips were firm, demanding, yet exquisitely careful. He did not force her. He invited her to fall. And she did. Her hands came up, grabbing the front of his shirt, clinging to him as the world tilted. She kissed him back, a surge of desperation, fear, and a profound, aching need rising up from her core. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and whiskey and secrets. His tongue traced her lower lip, a silent question, and she parted for him, a small gasp escaping her throat as he deepened the kiss. It was intense. It was overwhelming. It was everything she had been unconsciously craving since the moment she first saw him. He was the one who pulled back, but only by an inch. He rested his forehead against hers, his breathing heavy, unsteady for the first time. His hands were still cradling her face, his thumbs stroking the high arch of her cheekbones. Natalie was breathless, her body thrumming with an energy she did not know how to handle. The confusion came rushing back, sharper this time. Why? She whispered, her voice cracking. Why'd you pay? Just to do it? Just to... this? She hated the question. She hated that it made her sound like what she had tried so hard not to be. But she had to know if this was all just a long, complicated game to get her into an alley. Leon's eyes opened, and he looked directly into hers. The darkness in them was absolute, but for the first time, she saw a flicker of something raw in their depths, something protective. No, he said, his voice a rough gravel. I paid to make sure no one else does. The kiss in the alley had changed the rules. The pretense of the appointment was still there, a thin veil of professionalism that neither of them acknowledged. Natalie still went to the penthouse. The envelope of cash was still waiting for her on the console by the door when she left, but the money was no longer the transaction. It was an echo, a formality from a time that had ended the moment his lips touched hers in the rain. Now. The appointments began at the door. The elevator would slide open and he would be there, waiting, not by the window, not across the room, but standing in the entryway. The first time she saw him after the alley, she hesitated, her hand clutching the strap of her purse. He had simply taken the purse from her hand, dropped it on the floor, and pulled her against him. The kiss was no longer a discovery. It was a statement. His mouth was possessive, his hands moving with a new, confident familiarity. They learned her body not as secrets, but as territory. One hand would splay against the small of her back, pressing her flush against him, while the other tangled in her hair, tilting her head to the angle he preferred. And she let him. She arched into him, her own hands no longer hesitant, gripping his shoulders, his arms, the hard muscle of his chest. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the only thing keeping her from falling was the man who was himself the drop. Their physical relationship blossomed in these stolen moments, restrained by a set of unspoken fears. They were like two fighters, circling each other, testing defenses. The passion was intense, a bonfire licking at the edges of their control. Kisses led to more, his shirt unbuttoned, her dress straps pushed aside. His hands would learn the shape of her collarbone, the curve of her waist, the sensitive skin just below her ear, but they always stopped. The first time it had gone that far, he had been breathing hard against her neck, his lips tracing a hot path downward. She was pressed against the cold glass of the penthouse window, the city lights a dizzying swirl 1,000 feet below. He had lifted his head, his dark eyes clouded with a hunger that terrified and thrilled her, and he had seen the flicker of fear in her own. Instantly, he pulled back. He had stepped away, turning from her to rake a hand through his hair, his control snapping back into place like a shield. He was dominant, but in the gentlest way. He led. She followed, but he never pushed her past a boundary she was not ready to cross. He read her body like a language he was slowly deciphering. A shiver, a tensed muscle, a hitched breath. He registered all of it. Every moment they touched felt like something far heavier than lust. It felt like a negotiation of trust. One night, she slipped out. After a session on his leather couch that had left her breathless and aching, he had gone to get her a glass of water. In that moment of solitude, the reality of what she was doing had crashed down on her. She was in the penthouse of one of the most dangerous men in Chicago, willingly, her clothes in disarray, panicked. She had fixed her dress, grabbed her purse and the envelope, and fled, ringing for the elevator and not looking back. He had not called, he had not texted. He simply waited for the next scheduled appointment. When she arrived, her stomach in knots, expecting anger, he had looked at her with that same unreadable expression. "You forgot your wine," was all he had said, gesturing to the table. Now, 2 weeks later, he was changing the routine. "I have an event," he said, his back to her as he poured a drink, "a gallery opening. It is a requirement. I need you to accompany me." Natalie paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "You need me? In public?" "It is a sterile environment," he said. "Art dealers and investors. You will be fine." This was different. This was not the safe, sterile bubble of the penthouse. This was his world. A box arrived at her apartment the next day. No note. Inside was a dress of midnight blue velvet that felt like liquid silk in her hands, and a pair of heels that were taller than any she had ever worn. They fit perfectly. The gallery was a white, cavernous space, echoing with the sound of polite laughter and clinking glasses. Natalie felt like a fraud, a diner waitress in a borrowed velvet skin. Leon's hand was a permanent, heavy weight on the small of her back, guiding her through the clusters of people. He was impeccable in a black suit that looked like it had been tailored by a god. He introduced her to no one. He just kept her at his side, but people saw her. Oh, they saw her. She caught the whispers as they passed. "That is him. Leon Moretti. Who's the girl? I heard. From the south side. A waitress. The boss's new distraction." The words were like tiny, sharp needles. Natalie flinched, her grip tightening on the champagne flute she had not sipped from. Leon's hand on her back pressed down. A silent, firm command. Do not react. She felt unsafe, exposed, like an animal brought into a room full of hunters. One man, older, with a predatory smile and eyes that roamed her body like they owned it, stepped in front of them. "Leon," the man said, his voice slick, "I did not realize you had developed an appreciation for new art." His eyes were locked on Natalie, stripping her bare. Leon's expression did not change. He nodded. "Once. Sal." He started to guide Natalie away, but the man, Sal, reached out and grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her bicep, sharp and painful. "What is the hurry?" he leered, pulling her slightly off balance. "I was just admiring the craftsmanship." Natalie let out a small, terrified gasp. The shift in Leon was instantaneous. It was not a sudden burst of rage. It was a terrifying drop in temperature. The air around him went arctic. He did not raise his voice. He did not move quickly. He simply reached over, took Sal's wrist in one hand, and said, "Release her." Sal's smile faltered, but his arrogance held. Or what? Moretti, she's just a piece. There was a sound. A wet, sickening pop that cut through the gallery's murmur. Sal screamed. It was a high-pitched, agonizing sound that shattered the polite atmosphere. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his hand, his wrist bent at an angle that was hideously wrong. Leon had not even blinked. He looked down at the whimpering man, his face a mask of cold, utter disgust. He calmly adjusted the cuff of his own suit jacket. "Do not," he said, his voice a low, lethal whisper that carried only to the three of them, "ever look in her direction again." He took Natalie's arm, the one Sal had grabbed, and pulled her away, leaving the man writhing on the white marble floor. He walked her straight out the front door, past the shocked, silent faces of the other guests, and into the waiting black car. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. Natalie was shaking, her entire body trembling with adrenaline and fear. He had done that. He had broken a man's bone as easily as snapping a twig. He had done it for her. She was deeply, profoundly shaken, and, to her shame, she was also moved. No one had ever defended her. Not like that. The violence was horrific, but the protection it represented was a balm she had not known she craved. When they got out of the elevator, she was still trembling. Leon went straight to the bar and poured a heavy glass of whiskey. He handed it to her. "Drink," he commanded. She took it, her hands shaking so badly the ice rattled. She took a sip, the fiery liquid burning a path down her throat, but it did nothing to stop the tremors. He stood watching her, his face grim. "You are safe here." She knew that, but she also knew that the only reason she was safe in here was because of the man who was so dangerous out there. She set the glass down. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. He was a monster to them, but he had been her shield. She walked toward him. He watched her, his body tense, as if expecting her to scream at him, to run. She stopped directly in front of him. He was so tall, a monolith of controlled violence. She reached up, her trembling fingers touching his jaw. He was freshly shaved, his skin smooth, but the muscle beneath was rock hard. He did not move. He did not breathe. He just watched her, his dark eyes searching hers. She leaned up and kissed him. This kiss was not like the others. It was not the desperate hunger of the alley or the possessive claim at the door. It was tender. It was slow. It was gratitude and fear and a desperate, aching need all woven together. He responded instantly, his control breaking, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her against him with a groan that seemed to be pulled from the depths of his chest. His mouth opened over hers, and it was no longer a negotiation. It was a surrender. This time, when his hands went to the zipper of her velvet dress, he did not hesitate. He did not stop, and she did not want him to. He broke the kiss only to lift her, his arm sweeping under her legs as if she weighed nothing. He carried her from the living room, down the dark hallway, and into his bedroom. The room was like the rest of the penthouse, minimalist, dark, and dominated by a massive bed that faced a wall of glass overlooking the sleeping city. He laid her down on the cool, high thread count sheets. The moonlight and the city glow lit the room, painting their skin in shades of silver and shadow. He undressed her slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. The velvet dress pulled at her waist. He paused, his gaze tracing the lines of her body, and she felt not exposed, but worshipped. He was dominant. Yes, Kratos. But his dominance was a form underscore of attention, a total focus that made her feel like the only person in the world. When he moved over her, his own shirt discarded, his skin hot against hers, it was overwhelming. It was not the fast, selfish lust she had known before. It was a slow, deliberate claim. Every touch was tender, every movement controlled, every kiss a reassurance. He whispered her name, a rough, broken sound against her throat. She clung to him, meeting his intensity with her own. It was too late to be afraid. She was already so far past the line. She could not even see it anymore. Natalie woke to the feeling of being watched. She opened her eyes. Her body feeling heavy, warm, and thoroughly loved, the morning light was pouring into the room, bright and unforgiving. Leon was sitting in a chair by the window, already dressed in a fresh shirt and dark trousers. He was holding a cup of coffee, and he was watching her sleep. His face was unguarded, his expression one of profound, quiet intensity. She felt a blush creep up her neck, suddenly self-conscious. She was naked under his sheets, in his bed, in the daylight. The old panic, the urge to flee, fluttered in her chest. She made a small movement to slip out of the bed, to find her dress, to go back to her own world. His voice stopped her, low and rough with sleep. "Do not—" She froze. He set the coffee cup down and walked to the bed. He sat on the edge, looking down at her. He reached out and brushed her messy hair off her face, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Do not," he repeated, his voice softer. "Leave without saying goodbye again." The word hung in the air. Again. He remembered her fleeing. He was telling her that the rules had changed permanently. This was not a place she could run from anymore. She just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Get dressed. I will have a car take you home." The return to her apartment was a jolt. The penthouse felt like a dream, a different planet. Her small, cluttered living room was reality, but reality was no longer safe. She was making coffee, her mind still hazy from the night before, when there was a knock at her door. She expected Maria from next door, or maybe the mailman. She opened it to find a woman in a crisp blue uniform, holding a clipboard. "Natalie Evans?" the woman asked, smiling a bright, false smile. "I am from the building management office. We have a report of a gas leak on this floor, and we need to check your appliances." Natalie frowned. Mr. Henderson usually called her for things like this. "And her rent was paid for months." "I did not smell anything," Natalie said, her hand instinctively tightening on the door. "It is just a precaution, ma'am," the woman insisted, her smile tightening. "If you could just let me in." Natalie hesitated, a cold prickle of unease running down her spine. "That will not be necessary." Two men stepped into the hallway from the stairwell. They were broad, dressed in simple, dark suits, and they moved with a silent, professional purpose. Natalie had never seen them before. The woman's face went white. Her smile vanished, replaced by a flash of pure panic. Who are you?" the woman stammered, taking a step back. "We are the building's private security," one of the men said, his voice polite but flat. "The building is secure. Your services are not required." He took a step toward her. The woman in the uniform turned and fled, nearly tripping over her own feet as she scrambled for the stairs. The two men did not follow. They simply turned to Natalie, who was standing in her doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Have a good day, miss," the first man said. They turned and walked back into the stairwell, disappearing as silently as they had arrived. Natalie slammed the door and locked it, her back pressing against the wood. She was being followed, not by enemies, by him. He had men watching her construction. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking, and dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. "You have men outside my apartment, yes." She was furious, her voice rising. "You put a target on me at that gallery, and now you have me guarded like one of your possessions. Where are you?" he asked, his voice calm. "I am in my apartment," she shouted, "but that is not the point." He hung up. 10 minutes later, there was a heavy knock on her door. She looked through the peephole. It was Leon. She ripped the door open. He was standing in her dingy hallway, looking as out of place as a wolf in a petting zoo. He walked past her into her tiny living room, his presence seeming to suck all the air out of the space. "You cannot do this," Natalie said, her voice trembling with anger. "You cannot just send men to my home." "The woman," he said, his back to her, as he looked at a picture of her and Chloe on the bookshelf, "was not from the landlord's office." Natalie stopped. What? She was from Sal, the man from the gallery. She had a blade in her pocket. The blood drained from Natalie's face. She sank onto the arm of her couch, her legs suddenly weak. Leon turned to face her. His eyes were dark, his face etched with something she had never seen before. It looked like regret. "I tried to keep you out of this, Natalie," he said, his voice low and heavy. I tried to keep my world separate from yours. I failed. My enemies know you are important. They will try to use you to get to me." Natalie looked at him, at this powerful, dangerous man standing in her living room, admitting failure. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She finally understood. There was no going back. She could run, but they would find her, or she could stay. She stood up and walked to him, stopping until they were almost touching. "It is too late for that." "Leon," she said, her voice quiet but strong, "you cannot keep me out." He looked down at her, a question in his eyes. She reached up and touched his chest, right over his heart. "It is too late," she repeated. "I am already in." The safe house was a condominium on the 42nd floor of a building that did not exist. At least, it did not exist on any public register. It was a ghost address, a fortress of glass and reinforced steel in the sky, bought and paid for by one of Leon's shell corporations. It was beautiful. The marble in the bathroom was heated from beneath. The kitchen was stocked with food she had only ever seen in magazines. The view stretched from Lake Michigan to the western suburbs, a glittering carpet of light. It was also a cage, a luxurious, silent, soul-crushingly lonely cage. Her old apartment had been small and drafty, the sounds of her neighbors and the street a constant, chaotic symphony. This place was silent. The windows were so thick, not even the wail of a distant siren could penetrate them. The only sound was the faint hum of the air filtration system. 2 of Leon's men were stationed in the hallway outside, and she knew there was another team in the lobby. They were polite, invisible, and utterly immovable. She was a protected prisoner. Leon himself became a ghost. In the first week, he had stayed with her, their nights a continuation of the raw, desperate honesty they had found. But then, his world began to pull him back. The threat from Sal and other rivals had intensified, and his presence, he explained, put her in more danger. He started visiting, then calling. The visits became brief, tense affairs. He would stand across the living room, his suit jacket on, as if ready to leave at any moment. He would scan the room, check the locks, and look at her with an unreadable expression. "Are you safe?" he would ask. "Yes," she would reply. "Do you need anything?" "I need to see my sister." His jaw would tighten. "It is not safe. Natalie? Not yet. Soon." Then he would be gone, leaving behind the scent of his cologne and a silence that felt heavier than before. The phone calls were worse. They were clipped, devoid of the emotion she knew he was capable of. He was building walls again, not between them, but around himself. He said it was to keep her safe, to keep his enemies from seeing any pattern, any weakness, but to Natalie, alone in the silent apartment. It felt like he was pulling away. The doubt began as a small, insidious whisper. Has intimacy been a fluke? Had the confession been a moment of weakness he now regretted? She was his weakness. Maybe he was managing that weakness by icing her out, by turning her back into a responsibility, a debt to be paid rather than a person to be loved. The gilded cage began to feel less like protection and more like a beautifully furnished holding cell. She'd not seen Chloe in 3 weeks. The separation was a physical ache. She called the hospital, but the brief, cheerful conversations with her sister only made the loneliness worse. Chloe was starting a new round of treatment and Natalie was not there. She could not take it. The luxury, the safety, the isolation, it was all suffocating her. One rainy Tuesday night, she made a decision. She had been watching the guards' movements. She knew they changed shifts at 2 a.m. There was a service elevator at the end of the hall, used by a discreet catering staff that stocked the pantries of the building's anonymous tenants. At 1:55 a.m, she slipped out of her apartment. She did not take a purse, just her keys, her phone, and a wad of cash she had hidden in a book. She padded down the carpeted hall in her sneakers, her heart pounding a frantic drum against her ribs. The main hallway was empty. She slipped through the service door, into the concrete stairwell, and ran down 42 flights of stairs. She emerged into a deserted alley, gasping, her legs shaking. The cold, damp air of the city felt incredible. She was free. She flagged a cab and gave the driver the address for the hospital, her voice trembling. Chloe was asleep when she arrived. Natalie slipped into the room, the dim light of the monitors casting a pale glow. She sat in the vinyl chair by the bed, her heart aching. Her sister looked so small, so fragile. Natalie just sat, watching her breathe, for over an hour. Finally. Chloe's eyes fluttered open. "Nat," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "What are you doing here? It is the middle of the night. I missed you," Natalie whispered, her throat tight. She leaned forward and took her sister's hand. "I just needed to see you." Chloe squeezed her hand, her brow furrowing. "Are you okay, Nat? You look scared, and you are shaking." "I am fine," Natalie lied, forcing a smile. "Just cold from the rain. Go back to sleep. I will be here when you wake up." She stayed until dawn, until a nurse came in and gave her a strange look. Natalie kissed Chloe's forehead, promised to be back that afternoon, and left. The lie tasted like poison. She walked out the hospital's main entrance, the city coming to life around her. She felt drained, exhausted, but lighter than she had in weeks. She decided to walk a few blocks before finding a cab, needing to feel the pavement under her feet. She turned a corner onto a quiet side street lined with parked cars. A dark sedan with tinted windows, parked halfway down the block, suddenly flashed its headlights. 2 men got out. They wore black ski masks. Natalie's blood ran cold. She spun around to run, but a 3rd man was behind her. He grabbed her. She screamed, but he clamped a rough, gloved hand over her mouth. "We have been waiting for you. Little bird," he rasped, his voice muffled by the mask. He shoved her hard against the brick wall of an adjoining building. The impact knocked the breath from her. "Just a friendly warning," the man said, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled like stale coffee. "Your boyfriend cannot keep you in his tower forever." "He thinks he runs this city," another man said, stepping closer. He pulled a small knife from his pocket, the blade gleaming in the flat morning light. He did not point it at her, just held it, letting her see it. "But he is just one man." "And you," he said, tapping her cheek with his gloved finger, "are his weak spot. Stay away from Leon Moretti. Go back to your diner. This is your only warning." Panic gave way to a white-hot, desperate rage. She was not a weak spot. She was not a victim to be passed around. She brought her knee up, hard, connecting with the groin of the man holding her. He roared in pain, his hand flying from her mouth. "Run!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. At no one. At everyone. The 2nd man lunged, and Natalie did not hesitate. She had her keys in her hand, clenched in her fist, the metal biting into her palm. She lashed out, raking the keys across the back of his hand. He howled and dropped the knife. The 3rd man grabbed her hair, yanking her back. "You stupid girl!" "Hey!" a voice shouted from across the street. A man in a tracksuit, walking his dog, had stopped. "I'm calling the cops!" The man holding her hair cursed. He shoved her, hard. She stumbled and fell, her hands and knees scraping against the rough pavement. The 3 men piled back into the sedan. The car's tires screeched as it tore down the street and disappeared. Natalie was left on the sidewalk, panting, bruised, and trembling violently. Her jeans were torn at the knee, which was already bleeding. Her cheeks stung where the man had tapped her. She pushed herself up, leaning against the brick wall, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and terror. The man with the dog was gone. She was alone. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the wet pavement, and then the tears came. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, choking sobs. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers fumbling on the screen. She pressed his number. He answered on the first ring. "Natalie, what is wrong? I know you are not at the safe house." His voice was tight, controlled. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a broken sob. "Where are you?" he demanded. The control was gone, replaced by a raw, cold urgency. She managed to gasp out the name of the cross street. The line went dead. She did not know how long she sat there. 3 minutes. Maybe 5. It felt like an eternity. Then she heard it. The sound of a high-performance engine being pushed to its limit, a black sports car, one she had never seen before. fishtailed around the corner and slammed to a stop just feet from her. Leon was out of the car before the engine even cut off. He was not wearing a suit. He was in a black t-shirt and jeans, his hair a mess, as if he had just rolled out of bed. His face was a mask of pure, terrifying fury. He saw her. He saw the torn jeans, the blood on her knee, the red mark on her cheek. The rage did not vanish, but it turned inward. His expression crumpled, just for a second, into something that looked like agony. He was at her side in 2 long strides, crouching in front of her on the dirty pavement. His hands hovered over her as if he was afraid to touch her, afraid she might break. "I am fine," she whispered, a lie that sounded pathetic even to her own ears. He ignored her. His touch was gentle as he examined her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. His eyes were black with a self-loathing so intense it made her flinch. He scooped her up into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her to the car, placed her in the passenger seat, and buckled her in. His movements clipped and efficient. The drive back to the safe house was suffocatingly silent. He drove with one hand, his other gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The air in the car was vibrating with his contained rage. He got her inside, into the gleaming, sterile apartment. He kicked the door shut, and the lock snicked into place. He did not coddle her. He pointed to the bathroom. "Clean up. I will get the first aid kit." When she came out, her knee bandaged and her face scrubbed clean, he was pacing the living room like a caged panther. "What?" he bit out, his voice dangerously low. "Were you thinking?" The cold fury in his voice snapped her own fear. "What was I thinking?" she shot back, her voice rising. "I was thinking I needed to see my sister, the sister who is sick, in case you forgot." "I put you here to keep you safe," he roared, slamming his flat palm on the marble kitchen counter. The sound cracked through the room. "And the moment I turn my back, you walk out the front door and into their hands. Do you have any idea what they could have done to you?" "I know what you have done," she screamed, tears of anger and frustration welling in her eyes. "You locked me in this box. You disappeared. You treated me like a problem you had to manage. I am not a possession, Leon. I was protecting you. No, you were hiding me. There is a difference. You think because you paid my rent and bought me a dress that you own me? You think money makes it okay to decide everything for me?" The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Leon stopped pacing. He stared at her, the fury draining out of him, replaced by a sudden, hollow emptiness. He looked broken. "Money?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You think this is about money?" He laughed, but it was a dry, bitter sound. He walked to the window and stared out at the city, his back to her. "I paid," he said, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear him, "because I owed your father." Natalie froze. What did you say?" He turned to face her. His eyes were glistening, his mask of control completely gone. "Michael Evans," he said, his voice thick. "Your father. He died in a warehouse fire 18 years ago. Is that right?" Natalie nodded, her blood turning to ice. "It was an accident, an electrical fire." "It was not an accident," Leon said, "and I was there." He looked at her, and the weight of years, of a secret held for a R-rated lifetime, was in his gaze. "I was a kid, 17, stupid, arrogant, trying to prove myself to men I should have run from. I was in that warehouse. The fire was arson. It was a message. The men I was with, they locked us in." He swallowed, his gaze distant, lost in the memory. "The place was an inferno. The beams were coming down. I was trapped. I could not move. Your father, he was a security guard. He was just doing his rounds. He found me. He could have run. He had a clear path, but he did not. He grabbed me. He pushed me through a collapsing doorway, shielding me with his own body. A beam came down. It trapped him." Leon's voice broke. "He died saving me. A stupid kid he did not even know." Natalie sank onto the couch, her hand over her mouth. She could not breathe. Her father, the fire, the stories her mother had told. It all swirled in her head, a sickening kaleidoscope. "You knew him? I never forgot his name," Leon whispered, tears now tracking silently down his face. "I made a promise. standing in that alley, watching the building burn. I promised I would find his family, that I would make it right, that I would watch over them. He looked at her, his expression raw with guilt. I watched you from a distance for years. I paid for your mother's funeral, anonymously. I wanted to help, to pull you out, but my world, it is poison. I knew if I got close, I would destroy you, just like I almost did today. He scrubbed a hand over his face. The night I saw you in that diner, you looked so tired. You looked just like him. In that last second, the same eyes, the same strength, and I could not stay away anymore. I told myself I would just pay the rent, just fix the one thing I could, but I was selfish. I wanted to be near you. They were both crying now. It was not quiet. It was the messy, ugly, necessary sound of two people breaking completely open. She understood all of it. The dinners, the money, the protection, the distance. It was not a game. It was a penance. It was a life debt he had been trying to pay for almost 2 decades. She stood up and walked to him. He was still the most dangerous man she had ever met. But in this moment, he was just a man, drowning in a past he could not escape. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the wet track on his cheek. "You have been alone with this," she whispered, "for so long." He visibly shattered at her touch. He grabbed her, his arms wrapping around her waist, and he buried his face in her neck, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. He did not say anything. He just held her, his body shaking. She held him back, her own tears soaking his shirt. All the fear, the anger, the loneliness, it all dissolved, replaced by a profound, aching understanding. He lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed, his face stripped bare of all artifice. He looked at her, really looked at her, not as a debt, not as a weakness, but as the woman she was. He kissed her. It was not like any kiss before. It was not about passion or possession. It was a kiss of raw, desperate honesty. It tasted of salt and regret and a desperate, shared need. There was no pretense. There was no shame. He lifted her into his arms, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, clinging to him. He carried her to the bedroom, and this time, there was no seduction, no slow, tender exploration. It was raw. It was necessary. It was two people who had been completely stripped of their armor. Standing naked in the ruins, he laid her on the bed, his movements urgent, desperate. His hands were not gentle. They were shaking, frantic, as if to reassure himself she was real. She was there. She was safe. She met his desperation with her own. She pulled his shirt off, needing to feel his skin against hers. This was not about pleasure. This was about connection. It was about erasing the secrets, the loneliness, the years of pain. It was a raw, aching confirmation that they were both still alive, together in that room, and for tonight at least, the world outside, with its fire and its enemies, could not touch them. The confession had not just cleared the air, it had rebuilt the world. The safe house was no longer a cage, it was a home. The silence was no longer lonely, it was a shared quiet. They existed in the fragile peace of their new honesty. Leon, stripped of his decades-long burden, was different. He was still quiet, still intense, but the cold, granite-like control had been replaced by a focused warmth he reserved only for her. He would watch her make coffee, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. He would sit with her on the couch, not across the room, his arm draped over the back, his fingers idly playing with a strand of her hair. They were learning from each other. The man who had paid a life debt and the woman who had, in her own way, just paid him. But the world outside their glass tower did not care for their peace. It began 3 days after her escape from the men on the street. Leon's organization had struck back, fast and brutal. The man named Sal had vanished, and the message was clear. Natalie was untouchable. But their enemies were not so easily silenced. They just changed tactics. Leon was on a call in his home office, his voice a low, commanding rumble. Natalie was reading a book on the couch, a blanket tucked over her legs. Her phone, which she had finally retrieved from her old apartment, buzzed on the table. It was a new number, a text message. She opened it. There was no text, just an image. It was a photograph of Chloe, asleep in her hospital bed. It was not a distant shot. It was taken from inside the room, from the foot of the bed. The angle was intimate, menacing. Underneath it was a single sentence. She looks so peaceful. Let's keep it that way. The book fell from Natalie's lap. The air left her lungs in a sharp, cold rush. The room tilted. Natalie? Leon was standing in the doorway of the office. His call finished. He saw her face. In 2 strides, he was across the room, taking the phone from her trembling hand. He looked at the screen. The warmth that had been growing in his eyes for days vanished, extinguished like a flame in a vacuum. The cold Arctic rage she had seen in the gallery returned, but this time it was 1,000 times more potent. It was not the anger of a boss being disrespected. It was the fury of a man whose family had just been threatened. He did not speak for a full minute. He just stared at the picture, his jaw so tight it looked like it might crack. They were in her room, Natalie whispered, the words choking her. Leon, they were in her room with her. He put the phone down and pulled her up from the couch, his hands firm on her shoulders. He looked directly into her eyes. I can end this, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Right now. I can have you on a plane in an hour. A new name, a new life. More money than you will ever need. You and Chloe, you will be gone. They will never find you. You will be safe. Natalie stared at him. A year ago, a month ago, even a week ago. She would have taken it. She would have run and never looked back. She looked at his face, at the torment in his eyes. He was offering her an escape, but she knew what it would cost him. It would confirm to all his enemies that she was his weakness. It would shatter him. You can do that, she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. You can send me away. And what will you do? Burn the city to the ground looking for the man who sent this? Yes, he said without hesitation. And they will know they won him, she replied. They will know they broke you by taking me away. She reached up and touched his face, her hand covering the hard line of his jaw. You gave me a choice in that alley. You gave me a choice by telling me the truth. You cannot take it back now. He closed his eyes, his control fraying. Natalie, this is not a game. That is your sister. I know, she said. That is why I am not running. She took a deep breath. You paid a debt to my father for 18 years. You paid once. Let me pay this time. With loyalty. Leon's eyes opened. He searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt, of fear. He found none. He only found resolve. If you stay, he said, his voice rough, you are not just in my life. You are in this. All of it. There is no going back. I am not going back, Leon, she said. I'm going forward. With you? So, what is the plan? A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. It was the first time she had ever seen it. It was terrifying. The plan, he said, is to give them what they want. For the next 2 days, they worked. It was no longer his world and her. It was theirs. Leon's second in command, a sharp, older man named Anthony, became a fixture in the penthouse. They spread maps and blueprints across the dining room table. The rival gang, led by a man named Gregor, wanted Natalie. They believed she was the key to breaking Leon. So we let them think they have her, Leon said, pointing to a map. Anthony will leak a rumor, a new safe house, a place I am moving to tomorrow night, a place that is vulnerable. He tapped a red brick building in an industrial district, an old warehouse, easily accessible, poorly defended. It is a trap, Anthony stated. It is a trap they will walk into, Leon corrected. Because they are arrogant, they think I am weak with love. And while they are hitting the warehouse, Natalie said, her voice quiet, I will be with Chloe. Leon and Anthony both looked at her. They are watching the hospital, Leon said. It is the one place I cannot fully secure without causing a panic. Exactly, Natalie said, her voice firm. They are watching it, waiting for me to panic and run to her. So I will go visit her, just like I did before. I will act normal. I will pretend I know nothing. I will walk right past their spotters. And your men, she looked at Leon, will be surrounding them, invisible. You will have 2 traps set, one for Gregor's soldiers, and one for the rats watching my sister." Leon stared at her, a new, profound respect in his gaze. He had wanted to keep her locked in the tower, but she was right. Her normalcy was the perfect cover. "Antony," Leon commanded, "pull the men from the hospital's outer perimeter. Make it look soft. I want them to get comfortable. Put 2 teams inside, disguised as orderlies, 2 on the roof. I want eyes on everyone who even looks at her room." He turned to Natalie. "You will not be alone for 1 second." The next afternoon, Natalie walked into the hospital. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. She clutched a bouquet of cheap daisies, a prop to make her look like any other visitor. She could feel the eyes on her. She knew, from Leon's briefing, that Gregor had a spotter in a coffee shop across the street, and another one pretending to be a grieving family member in the lobby. She smiled at the nurse at the desk. She walked to the elevator, her steps measured, casual. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to grab Chloe, to hide, but she kept walking. She entered Chloe's room. Her sister was awake, watching a game show. "Hey, sleepyhead," Natalie said, her voice bright and airy, though it cost her everything. "Nat," Chloe's face lit up. "2 days in a row? Are you trying to get fired?" "Just missed my favorite girl," Natalie said, putting the daisies in a plastic vase. She sat down, her back to the door, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. They talked. They talked about the game show. They talked about the food. They talked about a new nurse Chloe did not like. Every time the door opened, Natalie's heart seized. But it was just a nurse, or an orderly. One orderly, a young man with kind eyes, met her gaze, just for a second, and gave a nearly imperceptible nod before checking Chloe's IV drip. One of Leon's men. She stayed for an hour. It was the longest, most agonizing hour of her life, at the same time, across town. Leon stood in the darkness of the warehouse rafters, staring down at the empty concrete floor. It was cold, and the air smelled of rust and damp. "They are in position," Antony's voice crackled in his earpiece. 3 cars, 10 men. They are taking the bait, entering from the south. "Tell our men to hold," Leon murmured. "Let them get inside. I want them all." Below, a metal door scraped open. 10 men, armed with automatic weapons, fanned out into the warehouse. They were moving fast, expecting a simple snatch and grab. "Now," Leon said. Blinding floodlights snapped on, illuminating the entire warehouse as bright as daylight. "Chicago police!" A voice boomed over a loudspeaker, a recording, a misdirection. The gunman panicked, spinning, looking for the threat. Leon's men, positioned on all 3 levels of the warehouse, opened fire. The sound was deafening, a percussive, echoing roar of controlled chaos. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Gregor's men were trapped, caught in a perfectly designed kill box. Leon watched from above, his face impassive. One of Gregor's men, smarter than the rest, had taken cover behind a concrete pillar. He raised his weapon, not at the rafters, but at a dark corner on the ground floor where one of Leon's younger men, a kid named Vinny, was reloading. "Vinny, move!" Leon shouted, already dropping from the rafter. He landed on the concrete floor, shoving Vinny hard against the wall, just as a spray of bullets stitched the air where the kid had been standing. Vinny was safe. Leon felt the impact, a sharp, white-hot punch to his left shoulder, spinning him around. He did not go down. He raised his own weapon and fired twice. The man behind the pillar fell. The warehouse went silent. The only sound was the dripping of water and the echo of the last shot. "Leon!" Antony's voice was frantic in his ear. "Status!" Leon looked at his shoulder. Blood was spreading in a dark, fast-moving stain across his black shirt. "The package is secure," Leon said, his voice tight with pain. "Send in the cleanup crew and get me a car. I am going to the penthouse." Natalie was pacing the penthouse floor when he walked in. Antony was holding him up, and Leon's left side was soaked in blood. The room, which had felt so large, suddenly shrank. Natalie's vision tunneled. "Get him to the couch," she ordered, her voice sharp, all fear replaced by a sudden, cold fury. She ran to the bathroom, grabbing the medical kit Leon kept there. "It is not as bad as it looks." Leon grunted as he sank into the white leather, staining it crimson. "Shut up," Natalie snapped, tearing open his shirt. The wound was high on his shoulder, a messy, bleeding hole. "You promised me. I promised to keep you safe," he bit out, wincing as she pressed a sterile pad to the wound. "You promised," she repeated, her voice shaking with rage, not tears. "You stood in this room and told me you would not get yourself killed. You promised you would not throw yourself in front of bullets for me." He reached up, his good hand grabbing her wrist. He forced her to stop, to look at him. His face was pale with pain, but his eyes were blazing, more alive than she had ever seen them. "I did not," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "He was one of my men. He was a kid. I did it for us." She stared at him, the words sinking in. Us. Not him, not her. Us. He was not just protecting her. He was protecting the organization, the family, the life that was now theirs. She nodded, her fury ebbing, replaced by a grim understanding. She went back to work, cleaning the wound with steady hands. Anthony, his face grim, cleared his throat. "Leon, the hospital teams are secure. The spotters were taken. Chloe is safe. But we have another problem." "What?" Leon hissed, his eyes closing in pain. "The police. They were not at the warehouse. But they are moving now. They hit 3 of our other locations, simultaneously. And they knew where to look. They had shipment manifests, account numbers." Leon's eyes snapped open. He looked at Anthony. "A leak. It is worse than a leak," Anthony said, his voice heavy. "This was not Gregor. This was not an outside job. The information they had, it was internal, very high level, a betrayal. After all this, after the fight, the planning, the victory, a betrayal from within." "Who?" Natalie asked, her voice quiet. Leon and Anthony exchanged a look. It was a name Leon did not even want to say. "Marco," Leon said, the name tasting like acid, his second in command, the man who ran the finances, the man who had been sitting at their table, planning the attack. "He was at the hospital this morning," Anthony said, "checking the perimeter. He said he was planting the bug," Leon concluded. "He let Gregor's men go in, knowing we would take them out, and he used the chaos to cover his tracks with the police. He's cleaning the house, taking me out, taking Gregor out, leaving himself in charge." Leon tried to sit up, a roar of pain and fury in his throat. "Get me my phone. I want every man we have. I want his head." "No." They both looked at Natalie. She was standing straight, her hands stained with his blood. "You cannot," she said, her voice steel. "You go after him with guns. You prove him right. You prove you are just a brute, and the police will have every reason to tear this city apart to find you. You will be a wounded animal in a trap." "What do you suggest, Natalie?" Leon challenged, his voice laced with pain and rage. "We let him walk?" "No," she said. "He thinks I am the problem. Does he not? He is the one who has been whispering that love is your weakness. He thinks I am a stupid little waitress you got obsessed with." She picked up a clean cloth, her eyes meeting Leon's. "So let me be the one to talk to him," she said. "You cannot use your muscles, but I can use my voice. He thinks I am weak. He will be arrogant. He will underestimate me. Let me be the weapon you did not know you had." Leon was propped up on the sofa, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat, his left shoulder a mass of white gauze. The bullet had gone clean through, but the pain was severe. Anthony stood near the window, his expression grim, his phone vibrating with updates from a crumbling empire. "He will not meet with me," Leon gritted out, his good hand clenched into a fist. "He knows I will kill him with my bare hands." "No," Natalie said, her voice a calm anchor in the stormy room. She was wiping his blood from her hands with a clean, damp cloth. "He will not meet with you, but he will meet with me." Anthony turned, his disbelief clear. "Miss, with respect, Marco is not a fool. He will see a trap. He will see exactly what he wants to see," Natalie replied, tossing the cloth into a bowl. "He thinks I am Leon's weakness. He thinks I am a stupid waitress who got lucky. He's been telling everyone who will listen that Leon's obsession with me is going to destroy this organization. He is right, but I am going to be his destruction, not Leon's." She looked at Leon, her gaze unwavering. Call him, Anthony. Tell him Leon is in a bad way. Tell him the boss is compromised, obsessed with his own safety, and refuses to see anyone. Tell him Leon sent me to negotiate, to handle me. Marco will jump at the chance to see the weakness up close. He will not be able to resist. Leon stared at her, the pain in his eyes eclipsed by a burning, fierce pride. He nodded once. Do it. Anthony, set the meet, the lounge at the Blackstone. Public. Tomorrow at noon, and put a wire on her. No wire, Natalie said. Natalie, that is not negotiable. Leon snapped. A wire is too easy to find, she countered, her voice patient. He will be looking for one. He will pat me down. But he will not think twice about a terrified woman clutching her cell phone. She held up her phone. I will record it myself. He will just think I am afraid, waiting for a call. Leon hated it. She could see the war in his eyes, but he also knew she was right. Anthony, he commanded. Put 2 teams on every door, eyes on her, on him, on everyone. I want to be able to hear a fly land in that room. If he so much as breathes on her wrong, I want him gone. Leon, Natalie said softly, placing her hand on his good arm. He will not touch me. His ego is his leash. I know how to hold it. The lounge at the Blackstone Hotel was a cavern of dark wood, old money, and hushed conversations. It smelled of leather and expensive whiskey. Natalie sat in a deep velvet booth, her hands wrapped around a glass of water she had not touched. Her phone was on the table, screen down, the audio recording app silently capturing every ambient sound. She was wearing a simple cream-colored blouse, her hair pulled back. She had put on no makeup. She looked pale, tired, and scared. It was not entirely an act. Marco slid into the booth opposite her. He was handsome in a slick, corporate way, his suit perfect, his smile radiating false sincerity. He looked like a banker, not a traitor. Natalie, he said, his voice oozing sympathy. I'm so glad you called. I have been worried sick about you, about Leon. What has he done? Natalie let her lip tremble. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. He's not himself. Marco. Since the shooting, he has been barricaded in the penthouse. He's in pain. He's angry. He's not listening to anyone. I know, Marco said, shaking his head. I have been trying to tell him for months. This war with Gregor was unnecessary. He was distracted. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. You distracted him, Natalie. You know that, do you not? Natalie flinched, playing her part. I never meant to. I told him I should go, that I am just a waitress. I do not belong in this world. But he would not let me. Of course he would not, Marco said soothingly, placing his hand over hers on the table. She resisted the urge to pull away. He is obsessed. It is a classic flaw. The strongest men fall the hardest. It is a sickness, this love. He said the word like it was a disease. I do not know what to do, Natalie whispered, letting a tear slip down her cheek. He is going to get himself killed, and your men, the police, they are everywhere. I heard them on the phone and they knew everything. Someone betrayed him. Marco's eyes sharpened. He squeezed her hand. The organization is bleeding. Natalie, Leon is too blind to see it. He put you, a civilian, above his family. He took his eye off the ball, and our enemies pounced. And the police, well, some situations require a controlled burn. Sometimes you have to cut away the sick part to save the body. There it was. Natalie held her breath. You? She breathed, as if in horrified realization. You were the leak? Marco leaned back, a smug, satisfied smile touching his lips. He thought she was a hysterical woman finally putting the pieces together. I did what had to be done. Leon was compromised. He was throwing away a lifetime of work for what? A few nights in the penthouse? He made his choice. I made mine. I am saving this family from its own leader. But what happens now? Natalie asked, her voice small. What about Leon? Leon's time is over, Marco said, his voice turning cold. The police will handle him, and I will handle the organization. I will clean up this mess he made. He gave her hand a final pat and leaned back, the picture of a confident executive. And you? Natalie? You are smart. You came to me. You will be taken care of. You just go home, lock your door, And forget you ever met Leon Moretti. This will all be over by tonight. He stood up, dropped a $20 bill on the table for her water, and walked out of the lounge without a second glance. Natalie sat for a full minute, her body rigid. Then, with a steady hand, she reached out, picked up her phone, and tapped the stop button. She saved the file. The arrest did not happen in a hail of gunfire. It was quiet, surgical. Antony's men intercepted Marco's car 2 blocks from the hotel. They did not pull guns. They simply surrounded him. And 2 unmarked cars, federal, not city police, blocked him in, apparently. Marco had not just betrayed Leon. He had been skimming from his own deals. And the recording of him confessing to handling a police investigation was all the leverage the feds needed. He was gone. But the media firestorm had just begun. The story exploded. Marco, in a desperate attempt to save himself, had leaked Natalie's name to the press. The headlines were brutal. Mobby mistress exposed, the waitress who toppled a crime boss, a penthouse and a payoff, how Natalie Evans brought the Moretti family to its knees. Her face was everywhere. A grainy photo from the diner's security camera, a long lens shot of her getting into Leon's car. Her old life, her simple, anonymous life, was gone. It had been incinerated in the flashbulb of a single news cycle. She stood in the penthouse, watching the news report on the giant television. They were outside her old apartment. They were interviewing Jerry from the diner. "I knew she was trouble," he was saying. "Always quiet, always keeping secrets." Natalie pressed the mute button. The silence of the room rushed in. She was a spectacle, a pariah. She could never go home. She could never see Chloe without a swarm of reporters following her. She had won. She had saved him. And she had lost everything. "I have to go," she said, her voice hollow. Leon was standing behind her, his arm in a black silk sling. He had been quiet, watching her absorb the fallout. "Go where, Natalie? You are safer here than anywhere in the world." "That is not the point," she said, turning to face him. Her eyes were dry, her emotions burned out. "Safer? Look at that. I am your weakness. Leon, Marco was right. I did not destroy you. But I did this. I brought the world to your door. As long as I am here, as long as I am Leon Moretti's mistress, you will never be safe. They will never stop." She walked to the bedroom. "I will be gone in an hour. You can send me to one of those places you promised. A new name, a new life. It is the only way to protect you, to protect Chloe from this." "No," she stopped, her hand on the doorknob. "I will not let you," he said. "You cannot stop me, Leon," she whispered. "This is not a debate. I am doing this for you." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his good hand grabbing her arm, spinning her to face him. His eyes were not angry. They were blazing with a raw, desperate clarity. "I spent 18 years paying a debt," he said, his voice low and intense. "I spent my entire adult life building walls, living in silence, convinced that I was poisoned. And then you walked into that penthouse. You were the first real thing that has happened to me, ever." "Leon, do not," she pleaded. "You are not my weakness, Natalie," he growled. "You are the only part of me that is not weak. You faced down a killer with nothing but your phone. You took a target off my sister. You saved my entire organization while I was bleeding on this couch." He reached up, his hand cupping her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I am not proposing. Not with a ring," he said, his voice breaking. "I am making a vow. I am not offering you protection. I am offering you my name, my life, my loyalty. I am offering you all of it, the good, the bad, the chaos. I do not care if the police are at the door. I do not care if the press is screaming your name." He leaned in, his forehead touching hers. "Let the world burn. Just stay." Tears she did not know she had left began to fall. He was not locking her in a cage. He was handing her the key to his kingdom. He was not offering to hide her. He was asking her to stand with him in the fire. She hesitated, the weight of his world, of his vow, settling on her. This was the final choice, the quiet life, or this magnificent, dangerous man. She rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of acceptance. It was a promise. "I will stay," she whispered against his lips, But not for protection, not anymore. She pulled back, her eyes meeting him. For love. Later that night, the city was quiet. The news cycle had moved on. For now. Leon's shoulder was healing. Her bruises from the pavement had faded to a dull yellow. The penthouse, their fortress, was silent. Leon walked to the sound system, his movements stiff. Soft music, a low instrumental jazz piece, began to fill the room. He turned to her. He did not say a word. He just held out his good hand. She walked to him and placed her hand in his. He pulled her close, his left arm in its sling trapped between them, his right arm wrapping securely around her waist. She rested her head against his chest, her ear over his heart, listening to the strong, steady beat. They danced. They swayed slowly in the middle of the dark living room, the city lights glittering below like a carpet of fallen stars. They were two broken, bruised people who had found their hole in each other. The future was a question mark. The world outside was still burning. But here, in his arms, they were safe. They were home. 6 months later, the bell above the door of a small, bright cafe on a tree-lined street in Lincoln Park chimed. The New Leaf Cafe was bustling. The walls were a soft green. The air smelled of fresh espresso and baking croissants. Natalie, her hair tied up, was wiping down the counter, a genuine, easy smile on her face. "Boss," a young barista said, "that last order for table 4, was that an anonymous investor or a regular customer?" Natalie laughed. "All our investors are anonymous, Chloe." Her sister, her hair growing back in soft, healthy curls, grinned from behind the register. "Right, good thing, too. They bought us the best machine on the market." Natalie looked around her shop. It was real. It was hers. After the media storm had died, Leon had set up a fund, the one his father had left him, and made her the sole beneficiary. "For your father," he had said. "Build something." The bell chimed again. Natalie looked up, and her smile softened, deepened. Leon walked in. He was not dressed as a boss. He was in dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater, a pea coat slung over his arm. He looked like a professor or an architect. He blended in, just another customer. But his eyes were only for her. He did not come to the counter. He took a small table by the window, the one he always took. Chloe, already knowing the order, poured a black coffee into a ceramic mug and nodded to Natalie. Natalie picked it up and carried it over. She set it down in front of him. "Good morning, Leon," she said softly. "Good morning, Natalie," he replied, his voice a low rumble, his eyes crinkling at the corners. There were no more secrets. There was no more payment. He was just here. He came every morning at 8, sat for 20 minutes and watched her live the life he had helped her build. She went back to the counter. She looked at her sister, laughing with a customer. She looked at her shop, full of light and warmth. She looked back at Leon, who was sipping his coffee, his gaze a quiet, protective presence. She locked eyes with him through the window, a silent conversation that no one else in the world could understand. She smiled to herself, a small, secret smile, and whispered, so low that only her own heart could hear it. What he did left me begging for more. Thank you so much for listening to our story. Why'd you pay? Just to do it? She asked. What the Mafia boss did left her begging for more. We hope you enjoyed the journey with Natalie and Leon. We would love to know where you are listening from. So please drop a comment and tell us what city or country you are tuning in from. Your thoughts mean the world to us. Please share what you thought about the story in the comments. And if you loved it, do not forget to subscribe to our channel, Mafia Romance Stories, for many more tales of passion, danger, and love. Thank you for being part of our community.